Zhongli already has a signature weapon. It's a Vortex Vanquisher.
Can't believe bro forgot Cinnabar Spindle exists for Albedo.
Isn't Wolf's Greystone Delude's signature weapon? We already have Dodo Protectors. Is that better? Can I get on with the video now? Good. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of our signature weapon series. This time, we're switching it up a bit and making some alternative weapons for some of our 5-star units. Klee, Diluc, Albedo, and Zhongli all have weapons that are considered their signatures, but for one reason or another, there's room to try and give them another option that could be a true signature. So, I'll share some of these weapon ideas today. As usual, disclaimers, timestamps, social media links, music credits, and a link to my Discord server are all down below. Without further ado, let's start episode 13 of the Signature Weapon series.
You have already proven your determination. Well then, it is now time for you to witness my resolve.
Diluc has one of the easiest kits to understand and play, and this unironically made him a bit harder to design a weapon around. He's one of the few units who can use a 3-hit skill combo, so I knew early on that I was going to run the Yai weapon route. It's just that choosing what kind of buff to give him was difficult. Elemental damage bonus, crit bonus, attack bonus. It's doable, but also a bit meh at the same time. Thankfully, I found a pretty cool effect to try out. Dark Flame's Reckoning has a 608 base attack and a 66.2% crit damage bonus. For its passive, the user's elemental damage is increased by 12% by default. Casting an elemental skill grants a stack of Owl Sight, which increases the base damage of basic attacks, which are normal charge and plunging attacks, and skills based on 4 to 8% of their own element's elemental damage bonus. This maxes out at 3 stacks, with a duration lasting for 4 seconds. However, if max stacks are reached or refreshed, Owl Sight's duration will be extended to 20 seconds. Diluc has a lot of different playstyles and combos, auto-attacking for normal attacks, charge attack spamming, or even plunge attacks. You can do a triple skill combo, or you can weave in his autos and skills in a rotation. The hardest part with trying to make a new signature was maintain the flexibility of his gameplay, without also making the weapon too generalized for any unit to use. Diluc's main damage source comes from his basic attacks and skill. I also noticed an interesting aspect when it came to Diluc's builds. Most of his damage bonuses come from pure pyro damage. Generally, he runs Crimson Witch, which provides 37.5% pyro damage. Then of course running a Goblet grants another 46.6%, Bennett at C6 grants 15%, his burst provides 20%, and if you have Cinder City, that could provide another 40%. Other units tend to have ability-specific or universal damage bonuses, which aren't stats that can be snapshotted. This gave me the idea of using elemental damage bonuses as a scaling for the weapon. In a previous video, I made a Chongyun weapon using an additive base damage bonus. I've never made a weapon that uses a multiplicative bonus, so that's what Diluc is going to be. When you finish your 3-skill combo, Diluc will max out the base damage multiplier, which is 12% of his pyro damage bonus. After he reaches 3 stacks, he will keep the bonus for 20 seconds. Regardless of your rotation, uptime should be easy to keep. For example, if you start your rotation with 3 skills and a burst, Diluc will get the full bonus early on in his rotation, so every single basic attack after should have the bonus for the rest of the rotation. Another common combo is burst N2 skill 3 times, then another N2 combo to finish the rotation. With this combo, in the first rotation, the staggered skills mean you don't have a full bonus until the end, but since the stacks extend to 20 seconds, your second rotation should have the full bonus when you swap back to Diluc. From there, you can continuously refresh it to keep the bonus for the rest of the fight. I also made sure that this bonus still works on people who like to do plunge combos. You can either do the 3 skills at the start, or you can weave in skills between your plunges. This weapon is Diluc friendly for the plunge team, but your build might look different, so the bonus might not be as strong. Let's look at examples for Diluc's pyro damage bonuses. I first looked at a standard Crimson Witch Vape team with him, Xingqiu, Bennett, and Shilonen. With all of his bonuses, he added up to 171 pyro damage, which results in a 20.5% base damage multiplier. In a team of him, Furina, Bennett, and Shanyun, Diluc might instead be running Marushasei. He loses the Crimson Witch bonus, so his pyro damage is only 93.6%, resulting in around an 11% base damage increase. As mentioned before though, this weapon is mainly designed around a general playstyle, and in any of these Diluc teams, it's going to be a solid option. For alternative users, this can technically work on Kinich. Being someone who casts his skill multiple times in a rotation, he can max out the bonus pretty easily. The only problem is that Dendro damage bonuses are not as common. Kinich himself only gets the 46.6% Goblet bonus, which is equivalent to a 5.5% base damage increase. That bonus is incomparable to a 60% skill damage bonus from his signature. Freminet is also a really good option for this, but only if you play him as a cryo DPS. Physical damage bonuses don't work on the weapon passive, so in those teams, the Claymore is just a crit damage stat stick. Gaming is another really solid choice, because plunging damage falls under the basic attack category. In his burst state, he can cast a skill multiple times, allowing him to max out the bonus. Final user, and this was a very difficult obstacle, Malwika. In a test I did, I found that her skill swapping is considered as skill casting. So what you can do with her is cast her skill, then swap twice to max out the bonus. From there, her normal and charge attacks get buffed, so you can do the standard burst into basic attack rotation with buffed damage. Thankfully, my simmed calculations showed that Malwika's overall damage was still 2% worse compared to her own signature, so it's barely her second best. Considering this Claymore would technically be a standard weapon, it still makes it a really good alternative, since you can snag this on a standard banner. The main reason this weapon is one of Diluc's best choices isn't necessarily because the bonus itself is overpowered, it's mainly because Diluc himself can't maximize the bonus for other 5-star Claymores. Red Horn, Beacon, and Thousand Blazing Suns are all good stat sticks, but there's something in the passive that makes it less synergistic with Diluc. Diluc just needed a weapon that was more tailor-made for his kit, and this concept provides just that. That's all for this section. Next up is Klee.
Lucky all my new bombs are waterproof.
Similar to Diluc, Klee is a very generalist DPS. You can play her in Vape teams, you can run her as an Aura for Reverse Melt. There's Overload, Burgeon, Monopyro. So I couldn't make her a weapon for a specific team comp. Additionally, her damage sources are varied, so I couldn't make her weapon specialize in any specific damage category. But after looking a little deeper, I realized that I could use her varied damage sources to my advantage. Red Lucky Clover has a 6-weight base attack and a 66.2% crit damage bonus. The user is going to gain 2 to 4% damage bonus when different types of talent damage is dealt. Basic attack damage, skill damage, and burst damage each have 5 stacks. Each attack type stacks last for 10 seconds, and can be obtained or refreshed every 0.2 seconds. If all attack types have max stacks, the party gains a 12 to 24% elemental crit rate bonus. To break it down, you are trying to get a total of 15 stacks for the weapon passive. Normal, charged, and plunging attacks are one category where you max out 5 stacks. Skill damage is the second, also at 5, and burst damage is the third with 5 stacks. Get the full 15 stack amount, and you can max out the 30% damage bonus, on top of another team-wide 12% crit rate bonus. This makes it so that you have to have a character who can dish out a variety of damage types, and Klee does just that. Her basic attacks and burst are super easy to max out. The skill is the inconsistent part, but I think she should be able to max it out still. With a single cast of her skill, you get 2 or 3 stacks from the bouncing, and at least 2 or 3 of the bomblets should get it to max stacks. It'll be harder to get in fights where enemies move away from the bombs, but aside from that, it's definitely doable. You might have noticed that the bonus Klee gets is a universal damage bonus, not a strict pyro damage bonus. This is because she snapshots her abilities, so if you're building stacks throughout her field time, she wouldn't be able to make use of the new pyro damage bonuses from the weapon. A universal bonus is dynamic among most weapons, so even if Klee snapshots, she can still gradually deal more damage as stacks are gained. The crit rate bonus being team-wide was chosen for 2 reasons. 1, Klee's teams aren't the most meta, so it didn't seem like much of a power creep to make the buff a little bit stronger. Secondly, Klee's A4 grants the team energy when she lands a crit hit. I thought it would be cute if I added something along the lines of a sharing is caring motif to the weapon, but because of the snapshotting stuff I mentioned earlier, I had to mess around with the whole dynamic bonus stuff again. Regular crit rate is a snapshotable stat, so characters like Klee or Xiangling wouldn't be able to use the bonus. However, elemental crit rate is a dynamic buff, so even if a character were to have a snapshotting ability, they can still gain the bonus partway through its duration. Thank goodness we have workarounds for that snapshotting stuff. For alternative users, you'd have to be playing an on-field version of the character, since the basic attack stacks can only happen on-field. Also, since Klee is primarily an on-fielder, I designed it so that stacks wouldn't be gained while off-field. Yae, Wanderer, and Wriothesley are able to get a good amount of stacks, but they can't get the full 15. Yae is the closest at 14 stacks, since her burst can only hit 4 times. Wanderer and Wriothesley can max out the basic and burst stacks, but Wanderer only has 1 skill hit, while Wriothesley doesn't have any. Respectively, they hit 11 and 10 stacks. Charlotte can technically max out the stacks, but she won't gain too much from the damage bonus. Her main use for the weapon is the team-wide crit bonus. Baizhu can also technically hit max stacks, though you have to time it properly. When you cast his skill, the cooldown starts immediately, but the skill hits 3 times for 3 seconds. Once his cooldown ends, you have a 3-second window to use it again before the stacks disappear. As long as you keep timing it, you can keep max stacks for most of the rotation. Similarly to Charlotte though, the damage bonus is not that effective on him. Finally, Lisa is a unit who actually makes decent use of the weapon. Her tap skill has a 1-second cooldown, so you could spam her skill 5 times to get those stacks. Then her basics and burst are self-explanatory. In summary, we don't have a lot of units who specialize in dealing all-around damage typing, so it's actually a good mechanic to take advantage of for someone like Klee, who naturally pulls this off in her gameplay. That's gonna do it for this character. Next up is her big brother, Albedo.
Welcome to hell, bitch!
Oh my god!
Albedo's biggest challenge was Chiori. Mechanically, they work the same way. Off-field skill damage, which is geo damage, and is also defense scaling. I considered a weapon that would make use of Albedo's A4, but let's be honest, who plays him for the A4 passive? Fortunately, there was one difference in their skills I was able to take advantage of. Prismatic Quill has a 542 base attack and a 44.1% crit rate bonus. For its passive, the user's defense is increased by 28 to 56%. When an elemental skill hits an opponent, and the user does not have True Meaning, they gain True Meaning. This effect increases skill and burst damage by 48 to 96%. True Meaning can also be gained if they deal damage from a Geo Construct. If True Meaning is active, dealing skill damage will dissipate the effect after 0.3 seconds. All of these effects can occur while off-field. Chiori's Tomoto dolls are not considered as Geo Constructs, so it would have been super easy to go Geo Constructs deal 48% more damage. Yes, it would prevent Chiori from using this weapon, but it's also super boring. Instead, I tried to make a passive that was a bit more dynamic. Chiori's weapon is extremely good on Albedo, so what I wanted to do was make the Albedo weapon good on Chiori, without making it her new best weapon. I was inspired by the Mualani signature. With her weapon, you start off with 4 stacks, each increasing normal attack damage by 12%. Dealing normal attack damage loses a stack, but triggering Vaporize regains a stack. In Mualani's case, when she deals a vaped normal attack hit, she loses and gains a stack in the same hit, resulting in a net 0 loss. For her specifically, she can always maintain the 48% bonus. I did the same thing with Albedo's weapon, but instead of a slow loss with multiple stacks, there would instead be a fluctuating bonus. Here's how Chiori uses the weapon. Cast her skill and gain the bonus. When her burst hits again, it deals the buff damage and then loses the bonus. The third instance of skill damage deals unbuffed damage, but regains the bonus. This cycle repeats for the entire fight. Let's move on to Albedo. Albedo uses the same mechanic that Mualani uses with her own signature. He's going to cast his skill and gain the bonus. When his skill hits again, he deals the buff damage and loses the bonus. From that same hit, the game will recognize the source as a Geo construct and immediately refresh that effect. This will continuously repeat, creating that net zero effect I mentioned earlier. Albedo will always have the 40% damage bonus. That's just for the skill. There's also the other aspect, which is the burst damage bonus. The burst does absolutely nothing to affect the uptime of the bonus. You can deal as much burst damage as you want, and in the case of Albedo, since the bonus is always active, he can cast his burst whenever he wants. In the case of Chiori, you have to time it properly so that she has the bonus when you use her burst. For alternate users, the defense bonus is whatever, so we're mainly focusing on the skill and burst damage aspect. Aside from Chiori, Geo Traveler can use this properly. Their skill damage is a Geo construct, so they would have full uptime on this bonus. For non-Geo units, Furina is a solid pick. Similarly to Chiori, her Salon is going to fluctuate the bonus uptime, so every other hit deals increased skill damage. Alhaitham is also a pretty solid choice. His mirror attacks are considered skill damage, so he'll also have an alternating damage bonus with each hit. Layla has the same mechanic, though this weapon is only good for her on a DPS build. A character like Lynette can cast her skill, then utilize the damage bonus for her burst. The main caveat is that every other rotation will fluctuate the bonus uptime. Alternatively, you could just not use her skill again after the first attempt, but that reduces particle generation and increases energy recharge needs. Finally, there are a couple characters who can use the burst damage bonus frequently. I would say the two examples are Kaya and Ayaka. Their skill cooldowns are short enough that you can use their skills twice in a rotation. Skill once to activate the bonus, use their burst with the full bonus, afterwards, skill again to cancel the bonus. When you restart your rotation, your next skill will once again activate the bonus. In summary, characters with skill damage focused kits are going to have that alternating effect. But for characters with one-hit skills, focusing more attention on the burst damage is surprisingly more convenient to work with. I'm personally happy with the idea for this Albedo weapon. Not everyone was here in 2.3 for Cinnabar Spindle, so making a new signature for Albedo is definitely on the table. It's a new best option while still being a semi-viable option for other units. And considering the fact that he and Chiori have very similar kits, I'm very happy with the fact that both of their swords can share a top 2 slot among the pair. That'll be it for Albedo's weapon. Last but not least is Zhongli.
It won't be long before frustration turns to anger. Fly away, my little Akuma, and evilize him.
Zhongli had a pretty easy foundation for a weapon. Among the polearm roster, he's an HP scaling shielder. The only other person who has that niche is Toma, who's a 4-star. So I don't care too much while balancing around other signatures. See, Lolly's weapon is a standard example of create a shield, get a bonus. Zhongli's could have been the same, but as you might guess, this was very boring for me. So I played around with ideas and came up with this. Contract Carver has a 542 base attack and a 66.2% HP substat. For its passive, after the user casts a skill, they increase the active character shield strength by 20 to 40% for 20 seconds. When creating a shield, the party gains the sediment effect. For every second the shield stays active, the entire party will deal 6 to 12% more damage, with a maximum value scaling on the user's max HP. The damage bonus cap is 0.8 to 1.6% for every 1000 max HP the user has. If the shield breaks or disappears, the bonus will dissipate. For this weapon, it's already more effective than Vortex Vanquisher, because this weapon buffs the active character shield strength instead of the user. Since Zhongli is mainly an off-field support, giving him shield strength is pointless. This stat only works on the unit who's on-field. For the other part of the passive, we're playing around with a Yelan-style damage bonus. Over time, this damage bonus builds up until it hits a max limit. Instead of the HP stat affecting the damage bonus itself, it instead affects the damage cap. As the effect name implies, the idea of the bonus was inspired by real-life sedimentary rocks. These rocks occur through sedimentation, which is the process of smaller particles or debris gathering and compacting into a larger stone. In the analogy of the weapon passive, your damage bonus is the debris gathering over time, and then the max HP dictates how big the rock can get. This weapon also has another link to sedimentation. Naturally, larger rocks formed by sedimentation are going to take longer to build up. For the weapon, the bonus increase is the same amount per second, so for characters with a higher limit, like Zhongli, it will take longer to max out the bonus. Candace and Yunjin's off shields and Kachina and Yunjin's crystallized shields technically can proc the passive, but we're only going to focus on dedicated shielders for this. And with that, we have two other units who can use this weapon, Inefa and Thoma. Inefa is an attack scaling DPS and support, and I'm going to assume players would keep her on this build. So with that, the only main sources of HP would be the weapon and the flower artifact. Her max HP with this type of build is around 25k, so the bonus maxes out at around 20.4%, which takes 4 seconds to fully max out. This is a shorter time, but the bonus is capped at a lower value. Additionally, the damage bonus from the weapon is for talent damage, not reaction damage. Inefa's main source of damage is her A1's lunar charged hits, so they can't get buffed. Depending on your team, the weapon bonus also might not be effective. With units like Xingqiu, Yelan, Fischl, or Beidou, this works. But if you're supporting someone like Flynn's who also specializes in reaction damage, then this weapon isn't worth it. Next up is Thoma, and he actually has a very unique interaction with the weapon. The effect doesn't disappear when you create a new shield, it only happens when the shield breaks or disappears. With how Thoma's kit works, refreshing a shield simply stacks the absorption on top of his existing shield, but the shield isn't technically breaking and recreating. This means your damage bonus lasts indefinitely, as long as you can maintain its HP and duration. His max HP on a general build is around 32 to 37k, which is a 26 to 30% max damage increase, and a build-up time of around 5 seconds. Finally, there is Zhongli. He has the beefiest shield of all, and provides a lot of absorption buffs through his Universal Shield Multiplier, Tenacity, his signature, and his A1. Unless you're fighting a one-hit kill enemy, the shield HP should last for its entire rotation. Now for the damage bonus. I calculated he has around 53k HP, and this is main stats only, so 60k HP is very much within reach. This means we're looking at a 42 to 48% max damage bonus, which takes around 7 to 8 seconds to build up. Fortunately, Zhongli makes his shield around the start of rotation, so while the rest of your party does its setup, the bonus can start accumulating. When you get to your main DPS, you should be mostly done, so it's just a few more seconds of build-up before the bonus maxes out. Unlike Thoma, however, Zhongli recasting a skill will count as breaking and recreating, so the bonus is not able to maintain 100% uptime. I think this is fine, however. I mean, we're talking about a damage goblet's worth for the entire party. Giving it some downtime helps average it out to a more reasonable value. I designed this weapon with the old Hu Tao team in mind, and made the damage bonus team-wide. For example, the Hu Tao, Xingqiu, Yelan, and Zhongli team has 3 characters who specialize in damage, and a team-wide buff means all of them deal that increased damage. In a team of Neuvillette, Furina, Kazuha, and Zhongli, only 2 are damage-focused, so the bonus is slightly less effective, and then something like Lyney, Kazuha, Bennett, and Zhongli has 1 DPS, so the bonus is really focused on buffing Lyney. It's optimal to run teams with at least a secondary DPS for that extra damage output. Overall, the weapon was designed to give Zhongli a large offensive buff for his teams. His defensive utility is still one of the strongest in the game, but his only sources of offensive buffs include tenacity and the res shred of his shield. In a lot of cases, that isn't enough to make up for the damage loss your team has. Seeing that polearm shielders aren't too common, I figured making a stronger weapon with niche conditions helps a lot to buff Zhongli's place in the meta. Alright, that's gonna do it for this video. All 4 of these characters have much simpler kits, which makes it somewhat more difficult to play around with unique passives that they can take full advantage of. I'm happy with the ideas I came up with, and while these ideas aren't going to make the characters fully meta, I think these are at least decent buffs for their kits. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribe to support the channel. Let me know in the comments which ideas you liked, what you would change, or any alternative ideas you might have. Consider joining my Discord server if you're interested in sharing your own ideas with our community. Thank you for watching everyone, and I will see you all next time. Bye!